And welcome to the first installment in the refactoring series on the EvalSorts program. In this series, we will take a look at the basic EvalSorts code provided to you and attempt to change or add functionality along the way. We're going to be refactoring the code as we go in order to easily facilitate the changes that we want to make. At this point, if you haven't familiarized yourself with the EvalSorts code, I would pause the video and take a look at it for yourself. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Currently, when we print out sort results, we do it in a particular order. So we do it with name first, then length, then time. Now, let's say our client wants to do it differently. They want to focus on time, so they want the time to print first, and then the name, and then the length. If you take a look at EvalSorts, we do all this printing in 4 different spots. So if we wanted to reorder the columns, we would have to change each of these lines, because the implementation is right there in front of us. Now, changing code in multiple places isn't ideal because it increases risk that you'll mess up in one of different times. So currently, our code isn't in the best shape to make the changes that our client desires. Our goal is to refactor EvalSorts such that it lends itself very easily to changing this piece of functionality. And we're going to do this by moving this implementation to one place first and then changing it. In order to minimize risk and preserve our code base along the way when we're doing refactoring, we're going to be running our test suite as often as possible. And we're going to be working to preserve the functionality of our tests up until the point that we're at where we want to change the code to do the new functionality. So, to illustrate where our tests are now, I'm going to run our video tests. Right now, every test passes except for 2. Those are the wrong file count and file empty. Those are intentionally supposed to fail because our code doesn't handle that. But if you'll notice, the different EvalSorts tests all pass. So we're working right now with working EvalSorts. For now, let's go back to our code and start by simply creating a lexical alias for the printing that we wish to do. So to do that, I'm going to create a public static method. It's going to return a string. And then we're going to call it print sort. And then we know it's going to do this functionality. So I'm going to lift this up and then paste that here, return it. And then what's nice about taking it as a lexical alias, the compiler is going to tell us what it's missing. So I see that we're passing in a length here. So I'm going to change that just to length and make that one of the variables that we pass in. And then we send in a end time and a start time. That together is just going to be a time elapsed. So I'm going to call that there. We're going to send that in. That's going to be a long. And then as I'm looking at the format, I see that quicksort is kind of hard-coded in. A much better way to do this would be just pass in a name. So I'm going to call this name, and then to keep the order the same, I'm going to put this here. So we have a string name, an int length, and a long time. Now that we have this lexical alias, let's change run sort so that we actually use this thing. So this change is actually going to be really easy. We just need to remove here, and then instead of string.format, we need to just do print sort. Awesome. So we have to change up here, print sort, print sort, print sort, and then remove this unnecessary formatting because we have that already there. Awesome. Now that that's out of the way and we've changed our code a bit, let's rerun our tests to make sure we preserved everything. Our tests pass as we expected, so we're able to move on now. Alright, so going back to EvalSorts and looking at our solution, this is alright, but I noticed that all the variables that we're using don't make a lot of sense if you try to split them apart. To me, it seems as if they belong together. And we can create this belonging by creating an object to store these variables. Since we're going to be dealing with an experiment's results, I think a good thing to name this new object would be xResult. So the first step in that is going to be creating a class header. for X result. It doesn't need the brackets, so I'm going to get rid of those. And then we know that the data we wish to bind together is going to be a name, a length, and a time lapse. So I'm going to add those as instance variables. Int length, and then private long time elapsed. And a good place to start is after we've added these, we need to make a constructor that's going to take in all of them so we can bind it together. So I'm going to do generate constructor, and then tell it to select all these. Awesome. So now we have an X result that's going to take in a name, length, time lapse, store them all together. So with that new class, let's change our print to use this class instead of taking all these parameters. So it's going to take in a X result. Okay. Now I see that name, length, and time lapse are now red, so we need to have some way to get into these objects. So we're going to generate getters for these. Oh, there we go. Now we can just do er.name, or specifically getName, er.getLength, and finally er.getTimeLapsed, which allows us to get into that object. And we now see that print sort isn't working because we are passing in variables. So we want to change this so that it uses an X result. And an easy way to do that, since we kept the ordering the same, is just to do this, where we add new X result and then preserve the parentheses for the most part. Now this one's going to need that extra one there, and the final new X result. So I think that my code now will be able to use this new object. So like always, I'm going to go back and run our test to make sure we preserve functionality. Looks like we did, so we can move on going forward. Now that I'm looking at these changes, it seems kind of silly that we're creating these new objects to pass them into a print method when the object could just be printing itself. So I'm going to make that change now. First, I'm going to copy the functionality from our print sort so I can move it into our object. And then I think it would be best if the object just overrided the toString method so we use what's already in place for Java. So that would be public string toString. And then we're going to paste our functionality from before. Since we aren't passing in an object, these can just be the instance variables. So again, that goes back to just using name, length, and time elapsed. I think that looks good for that method. And then when we're doing this call, we don't need to call print sort anymore. When we just plus equals to a string, it's going to call the toString, so we can just have these objects sitting here. Got to do this for each of the ones. And then now, I believe this preserved the functionality, but just cleaned it up a little bit. So I'm going to run my test again. And like before, everything passes. Okay, so let's go back to EvalSorts start. And with printing now isolated to one spot, we are in a better position than before to change the column order functionality that we desired. Let's make sure that it prints the way the client wanted, which was name, time, then length. I see that I have a print sort method, which I'm not using anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then we're going to look down to the toString, which is the only place I'll need to change. So I wanted to do time elapsed first, then name, and then length. See, that should be simple. And then if we run our tests again, since we're doing a different functionality, they should fail now, which they do. So the 3 eval sorts fail. So now we got to change our tests to match what we think is supposed to happen. I ended up jumping ahead so that all the tests are now implemented with the new functionality we're looking for. Hopefully, when I run the tests again, they all pass since we changed the functionality. It doesn't look like they do. So this is one of the reasons why we test so often. When the tests fail, we know there's only a very limited amount of things that we could need to change in order to get them to succeed. Looking back here, I noticed that the formatter that we have for name is actually in its original spot. So I'm going to move that to where it needs to go. Hopefully, with that changed, when we rerun our tests, they should all pass. Awesome, we're back to the functionality of the tests that we had before. This concludes our first video on refactoring EvalSorts. In review, we refactored incrementally in order to get to a point where we only needed to change one spot, which was just toString method, in order to reorder the columns. Along the way, we ran our test suite a number of times so that we knew that the functionality was preserved until the very last changing step. Thank you for watching.